Did you ever have one of those white whale games? A game that you were so drawn in by, almost to the point of obsession, but for one reason or another never owned or played during the course of childhood? The Adventures of Willy Beamish for the Sega CD was my Moby Dick. Like most children of the late 80s and early 90s into video games, my interest extended beyond the cartridges themselves, and I had subscriptions to the popular magazines that dealt with the subject. When the Sega CD was released in 1992, I remember the pages of GamePro being filled with reviews and previews of all the upcoming titles for the Genesis add-on. Flash forward to 1995. The shelf life of the Sega CD had passed long ago, and probably owing to the fact that I'd never seen one in real life, I was still in a state of obsession with what I perceived to be a state-of-the-art device. The one thing that I wanted to get above all else for my birthday that year was a Sega CD. By 1995, especially in my area, it was very tough to find one in stores, let alone ones that dealt exclusively in video games. I remember that my family had to special order one for Babbage's, because of course the internet wasn't like it is now back then. You couldn't buy whatever you were looking for with a few clicks of a mouse. Despite the system being hard to find, some of the games are still available, though again, mostly in the clearance bins. Browsing for the selection in front of KB Toys, I land upon the Adventures of Willy Beamish, and I knew immediately that I had to get it. I'm not entirely sure why this particular title appealed to me so much. If I had to guess, I'd have to say it was because I was a huge fan of the point-and-click adventure genre, and that Willy Beamish was just a kid like me, so I could place myself in the shoes of the title character more easily than other heroes in fantasy-based settings. Cut to the day of my birthday, my presents are all unwrapped, and I'm getting ready to play my brand new Sega CD. Everything's hooked up, I press the power on, and it doesn't work. I can't even access that awesome intro screen with the groovy tune! Now you may be thinking it's because I had a Model 2 Sega CD and an older Model 1 Genesis, but both models are designed to work with each other, so it wasn't a compatibility issue. In the end, nothing we tried could fix the problem, and my thirst for full motion video action would sadly go unsated. Ultimately, I ended up returning it to Babbage's and picking up one of the just new on the market PlayStation 1 units, Street Fighter Alpha and Nova Storm. While I had tons of fun with the truly state-of-the-art Sony machine, especially when Resident Evil came out less than a year later, the Sega CD lingered in the back of my mind with thoughts of what could have been. Advance to the present. After having owned a working Sega CD in the form of the Sega CDX combo unit for about a year and a half now, the elusive Adventures of Willy Beamish is now a part of my small but growing Sega CD collection. Was the game worth the 18-year wait? Yes and no. The Adventures of Willy Beamish was released on the Sega CD in 1993, but it was preceded by versions for the Amiga and MS-DOS in 91, and for Mac in 92. It was developed by Dynamix and published by none other than Sierra, the pioneers of the point-and-click adventure genre. So this game had a prestigious pedigree. Surprising to no one, as it's right there in the title, the game focuses on 4 days in the life of the 9-year-old, sunglasses-wearing, skateboarding, totally extreme Beamish. Willy isn't the most upstanding kid, and, to be honest, is a selfish brat.
Glad you're home. I'm up to my ears and I really need your help. Aw, Mom! I just got home and I got online.
With a huge issue with authority. We're introduced to Willy at the end of the school year, and he's managed to get in detention one last time by causing a ruckus at an assembly when his frog Horny snatches the toupee right off the principal's scalp.
We've secretly been planning this.
Though it's clear from the onset that the character has a predilection for trouble, actions taken during the course of gameplay can affect Willy's behavior, and in turn will affect the final outcome of the story. During the course of detention, you can choose to keep Willy at his desk and write Mrs. Glass's essay, Or you can leave the classroom after she falls asleep and use a fake hall pass to sneak out. Choosing negative actions, however, may lead to a premature game over, and though our hero is a child, Sierra doesn't mess around, and things can end very badly for our little troublemaker. I was actually kind of shocked at some of the outcomes if you fail at the trickier puzzles near the end of the game, though I'll admit the most fun I had during my playthrough was trying to figure out all the bad endings, see how many involve Willy's demise. The Adventures of Willy Beamish and its peers were meant for and play best on the various computer platforms they originated on, so how does a point-and-click adventure translate to the Sega CD? Not well. Not well at all. Point-and-click adventures, by definition, utilize a mouse and, depending on the game, a keyboard to choose or input various on-screen actions such as look, open, pick up, etc. Outside of Europe and Japan, the Sega CD does not have this option, and the standard controller is the only method to play these games with. In the case of the Adventures of Willy Beamish, this is my biggest gripe with the game. Instead of the fluid motion of a mouse, the D-pad controls the movement of the icon on screen, and B is the main action button. A press of the B button chooses which dialogue option to go with, which building to enter, who to talk to, among other things. The A button will point out all of the potential options to explore in an area, and this is a very handy feature most of the time. Make sure to tap the button, not hold it, as doing so will cause the icon to flit about the screen like the Tasmanian devil on a coke binge. The C button alternates between the regular pointer and the looking glass, which cues up a recorded explanation of the item or area that was clicked on. At first, this control scheme isn't a problem, as Willy Beamish has a fairly slow pace at the beginning of the story, establishing the world and key players. Willy's biggest responsibilities at this point are to walk his dog Duffy, train for the Nintari World Championship with a cool playable Space Invaders meets Tetris game, and other household duties. Choosing to neglect these household duties will increase the trouble-o-meter, and when filled, the game is over, Willy is shipped off to cadet school, and given an attitude adjustment. In this part of the game, the D-pad control scheme is manageable. In the last part of the story, when things get serious and a number of do it quick or be killed action scenes are introduced and time is of the essence, the stiff movement of the D-pad can cause the cursor to get stuck or line up on the wrong button, causing instant death and becoming a huge headache. Chalk up a point for the computer versions. Another area where this port differs from most other platforms is the inclusion of cutscenes with actual spoken dialogue. The voiceover work isn't bad, but it contributes to the Sega CD version's second biggest flaw: long load times. It takes forever to get through cutscenes, and the fact that they constitute at least 70% of total playtime makes the game longer than it really should be. You can skip over them with the B button, but this doesn't always work the greatest, and it can still take forever for the next dialogue scene to trigger. Be careful not to hit the A button during these sequences, as doing so will repeat the current dialogue segment from the beginning. Even worse, the game is known to freeze or glitch out, especially when playing for over an hour, and you'll have to hear the same plot points over again. Fortunately, there is a save feature, which is located on the inventory screen, aka Willy's backpack, which can be accessed by clicking on Willy at almost any time of the game, except action scenes. This is what happens when you click the save button. That's disturbing. And it plays every time you save. At first, I thought I was being denied the ability to save. She sounds like she's mocking me. It sounds like, "Oh, you want to save, huh? Well, too bad. Come back some other time." I took the risk of resetting the system to see if the save kept, and fortunately it did, prompting you with a yes/no restore game question when the disk loads up. This is just one of many annoying sounds featured in this game. This is one instance where muting the sound and putting on some music or a podcast would be favorable, but being that this is a dialogue-heavy game, and as far as I can tell, there are no subtitles, this is not an option. The cumulative experience of multiple hours spent trying to save Frumpton from the evil Leona Humpford was numbing, to say the least. Every time I died, I had to wait forever to load up my save, only to repeat the process over and over. Unsurprised scenes of Willy being mashed into Toot Sweet, a parody of Splenda or NutraSweet, haven't haunted my dreams. I called it quits and considered coming back to it another time, but I decided I just couldn't bear even playing it for another few minutes. I have watched the ending on YouTube, and let me tell you, it's not worth the aggravation. You can look it up if you're inclined, but I'd recommend doing something more productive with the 4 minutes it would take. It's another example in a long string of "that's it" endings, requiring too much time and effort for little reward. I put in a number of hours, going for the story, trying to beat this game which had been in the back of my mind since childhood. Sad to say, the unfinished Willy Beamish chapter of my life will have to remain that way. When I first loaded up the disc, it was a total trip, finally playing this game after all these years. But the joy of the novelty turned into frustration as the story progressed. I think what it comes down to is this. This game was not meant to be played with a controller, and with a few exceptions, this goes for the entire point-and-click adventure genre. This does not mean that the Adventures of Willy Beamish is bad. It just means that it was not designed for the Sega CD. Maniac Mansion for the NES, though again being a PC to console port, is a good example of how it can be done right, with excellent 8-bit music, good-looking sprites, and an interface true to its origins without being hindered by a controller. The DOS version of Willy Beamish omits the voiceover, and surprisingly actually looks better graphically than the Sega CD version, runs more smoothly, and has a better soundtrack. The game might actually be enjoyable on a PC, Amiga, or Mac, and maybe someday I'll download DOSBox and give it a try. I wonder what the 13-year-old version of myself would have thought of this game if I'd been able to play my Sega CD on my birthday all those years ago. Given my stance on it now, I have a feeling I probably would have hated it and thought it was a complete waste of money, even though it probably cost no more than $20. That's not to say that my experience today was completely disappointing. It still makes me happy to finally own a copy, and it brings me back to the days of being nose deep in the latest issue of GamePro. So, I still have a fondness for this game, in spite of all its flaws. Well, we've experienced one Sega CD point-and-click adventure. Next time, with the recent shutdown of LucasArts, we're going to take another trip via the Sega CD to a little location called Melee Island to hopefully find a more enjoyable console point-and-click experience. It sounds like, "Oh, you want to save, huh? Well, too bad. Come back some other time." And it sounds like I'm like Italian when I'm trying to go for like a high-pitched, it's funny.